You were born on July 17, 1966, in the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacán. Hot country, rural, poor. Your family grew avocados. You had 5 brothers. You dropped out of primary school in the 5th grade to work the fields, because that was what you did when your family needed the labor and school was a cost nobody could justify. By 14, you were guarding marijuana plantations for local growers, not because you were ambitious, because that was the available job for a kid with no education in a region where the drug trade was the largest employer. Michoacán's Tierra Caliente had been a major opium poppy and marijuana production zone since before you were born. Organized crime wasn't an intrusion into that world. It was the economy, the regional employer, the only institution that reliably hired. You didn't choose the game. The game was the only thing on the menu. At some point in your early teens, you made a decision, not to leave crime, but to leave Mexico. You were young enough to believe that a border crossing could change the conditions you'd been handed, that somewhere north of Michoacán, the structure of your life could be different. It was the most understandable mistake you ever made. Sometime in the early 1980s, you crossed. You entered California illegally as a teenager and settled in the San Francisco Bay Area. No legal status, no education, no English. What you had were names: Ruben Ayala, Jose Lopez Prieto, Miguel Valadez. You cycled through identities the way other immigrants cycle through jobs. Whatever kept you moving, whatever kept the authorities from putting a consistent file together. In 1986, at 19, San Francisco police arrested you for stolen property and carrying a loaded firearm. 2 months later, your first child was born. You kept crossing under different aliases throughout the late 1980s. Each time the U.S. sent you back, you returned. Not because you had a strategy, because Michoacán had nothing waiting and California had the possibility of something. Even if that something kept shrinking every time the law caught up with you. You weren't building an empire. You were surviving. A young man from Michoacán, accumulating arrests and aliases and nothing else, trying to exist in a country that had no legal place for him. The criminal record was growing. The options were narrowing. The U.S. door was already closing, one charge at a time, before the door that shut it permanently swung open in September 1992. They kept sending you back, and you kept returning, until one deal changed everything. The deal. September 1992, a San Francisco bar called the Imperial. You and your brother Abraham walked in to sell 5 ounces of heroin for $9,500. Abraham handled the exchange. You were the lookout. Something was wrong. The bills were stacked too neatly. You warned Abraham. Keep the conversation moving, don't close the deal, don't trust these men. Police later recovered that warning on a wiretap. You were 26 years old and already sharp enough to smell a setup from across a room. 3 weeks later, both of you were arrested anyway. Your lawyers laid it out plainly. Fight the charges and lose, and Abraham, who already carried felony drug convictions, would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. A jury trial was a losing bet. You had a choice, and the choice wasn't really between guilty and not guilty. It was between your future and your brother's. You took the plea. Guilty, 5 years. You served 3 at Big Spring Correctional Center in Texas, a federal facility packed. With undocumented immigrants doing time for work, the border economy had handed them. Paroled, deported, 30 years old, a felony conviction in the United States. No education, no money, no legal path back across that border. The U.S. door was permanently closed. You went back to Mexico and did something nobody expected. The cop. You came back to Mexico with a criminal record and became a police officer. After your deportation, you joined the municipal police forces in Cabo Corrientes and Tomatlan, 2 small coastal towns in Jalisco. The details of this period are sparse. How long you served, what cases you worked, whether the intention was cover or genuine employment. What is known is that you left, and when you left, you didn't go looking for honest work. You entered the Milenio Cartel, a trafficking organization run by the Valencia family. One of the dominant criminal organizations in western Mexico at the time, with deep roots across Michoacán and Jalisco and influence that extended through much of the country's Pacific corridor. To lock in your position inside this structure, you married Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the sister of one of the cartel's key figures. It wasn't a marriage, it was a merger. You had no family connections in organized crime, no lineage, no inherited reputation. You were a deported ex-convict from Michoacan. Analysts later described the union as diplomacy, a man with no pedigree who secured his seat at the table by joining bloodlines. Your operational role was direct. Chief of Hitmen, protecting cartel boss Armando Valencia Cornelio, known as El Maradona. You were the enforcer. She was the credential. You had a seat at the table. Then the table collapsed, and you built a new one. The machine. What you built over the next decade, Mexico hadn't seen since the peak of the Sinaloa cartel. Under El Maradona, you managed assassinations and protected Valencia family operations across Colima and Jalisco. When El Maradona was arrested in 2003, the Milenio cartel came under sustained attack from Los Zetas, backed by the Gulf Cartel. The Valencia family fled Michoacan and relocated to Guadalajara. There, through a Sinaloa capo named Ignacio Nacho Coronel, you formed an alliance that extended the organization's reach and resources into new territory. You were learning the business from the inside, not just the violence, but the logistics, the finances, the political architecture of organized crime at scale. Then the dominoes fell. In 2009, the Milenio's top leader was arrested. In 2010, his brother followed. 2 months after that, Nacho Coronel was killed in a military shootout. The power structure you had operated under for nearly a decade collapsed in less than a year. The Milenio fractured into two factions. One backed a man called El Pilo. The other backed you. The rival faction, Guamaman Ilaifa, which called itself La Resistencia, didn't just oppose you. They accused you of engineering the arrests of the Valencia leaders yourself, of handing your own bosses to the government to clear the board. They called your faction Los Torcidos, the twisted ones, the traitorous ones. Whether the accusation was true, the implication was clear about how you operated. You didn't inherit power. You cleared the room. The faction war turned violent. Los Torcidos won. You renamed the organization Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG. You were at the top. The business model you built was industrial in a way the old marijuana and heroin economy never was. The pivot to synthetics, methamphetamine and fentanyl, was the engine. Chemical precursors imported from China through the port of Manzanillo. Industrial-scale labs, distribution networks running from Jalisco to the U.S. Midwest and beyond. The Sinaloa cartel had dominated by controlling territory. You dominated by controlling supply chains. It wasn't a turf war, it was a logistics revolution. In May 2015, CJNG deployed simultaneous roadblocks across multiple municipalities and shot down a Mexican military helicopter. 3 soldiers died. The DEA later described CJNG as one of the most powerful and fastest-growing criminal organizations in the world. You were not El Chapo. No interviews, no mythology, no tunnels with motorcycle tracks built into them. A handful of photographs of you existed. You didn't seek attention. You sought control. Every act of violence was strategic. Dismembered bodies left as warnings. Banners hung from bridges, execution videos uploaded to social media. Not cruelty for its own sake. Communication. Every act a memo sent to competitors, informants, and the government. The Manhunt. The U.S. State Department put $15 million on your head. The DEA placed you on its most wanted list. In February 2025, the Trump administration applied a terrorism tier designation to CJNG, moving beyond the standard transnational criminal organization classification that cartels had historically received. It wasn't routine procedure. It was a deliberate legal escalation, an attempt to apply counterterrorism statutes to a drug trafficking organization. You were no longer just a cartel leader on a narcotics enforcement list. Officially, you were a terrorist. You survived by disappearing. Reports placed you in the rural Sierras of Jalisco, Michoacan, Nayarit, and Colima at various points over the years. You moved constantly. You communicated through intermediaries. You were guarded by men with former military training who understood operational security as well as any government unit sent to find you. Then, the people around you started disappearing. Your son Ruben, known as El Menchito, was arrested and extradited to the United States. Your daughter Jessica Johanna was arrested in the U.S. on charges tied to the cartel's financial operations. Your wife Rosalinda was arrested in Mexico in 2022. Your brother was incarcerated. One by one, the people who shared your name and your table were removed from the board. You kept operating. By 2020, reports emerged that your kidneys were failing. You allegedly had a small private hospital constructed in the village of El Alsai-Waddle to manage your treatment. By 2022, security analysts noted you hadn't been seen publicly in years. Some concluded you were already dead. You weren't. You were hiding and you were sick. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, under sustained pressure from the Trump administration to produce results against cartel leadership, granted the military broader authority to pursue high-value targets. The U.S. Joint Interagency Task Force Counter-Cartel provided intelligence support, mapping cartel presence and tracking CJNG movements. U.S. and Mexican intelligence agencies worked together on what the Mexican Defense Department later described as complementary intelligence. What finally broke your cover wasn't a military intercept or an informant, it was a romantic partner. On February 20th, 2026, military intelligence tracked a trusted associate who transported one of your companions to a secluded rural property in the mountains outside Tapalpa, Jalisco. She met with you, then she left. You stayed. They confirmed your presence and began preparing the raid. The news closed on February 22nd. Tapalpa. Armed resistance, a firefight. Cartel members used high-caliber firearms and heavy weapons to try to repel the assault. You fled into the surrounding woods with your security detail. A second firefight erupted in the tree line. You were wounded. They loaded you onto a military helicopter bound for Mexico City. You died during the flight. 59 years old. A $15 million bounty on your head. Your family already gone. A country already burning. You never made it to the hospital. You were gone. The machine wasn't. Within hours, gunmen deployed across the country before the helicopter carrying your body had cleared the mountains. Vehicles were set ablaze and pushed across highways in Jalisco, Colima, Michoacán, Nayarit, Guanajuato, and Tamaulipas. The narco bloqueo, the CJNG's signature tactic, the coordinated burning roadblock used to shut down civilian infrastructure as a demonstration of force, appeared simultaneously across nearly a dozen states. Security forces identified approximately 250 roadblocks nationwide in 20 states. This was not a spontaneous reaction. It was a prepared response waiting for a trigger. In Guadalajara, burning trucks shut down major roads. Public transportation was suspended. The city went silent. Governor Pablo Lemus went on record telling residents to stay home and lock their doors. In Puerto Vallarta, a major tourist destination and a future World Cup host city, smoke rose over the skyline. Prisoners rioted at a local jail. A guard was killed. Time vienets are nulle comets divi secundus slips vatrali lax par. At Guadalajara International Airport, an active shooter situation was reported. Videos spread showing tourists sprinting through terminals. American Airlines waived change fees for travelers trying to leave. The U.S. Embassy issued shelter-in-place orders across multiple states. Canada's embassy told its citizens in Puerto Vallarta to stay indoors. By the end of the day, at least 25 National Guard members had been killed in the retaliatory violence that swept across the country. A state prosecutor's agent was killed in the city. Schools were canceled across several states the following morning. The message from the cartel required no translation. You took our leader. We can paralyze the nation. And now, with the smoke still rising, the question everyone is asking is the wrong one. The avocado farmer's kid from Michoacán became the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere, and the machine he built will keep running long after they bury him. It always does. The name changes, the leadership changes, the product shifts, but the conditions that produced him, the poverty, the institutional absence, the corruption, the industrial demand for narcotics on the other side of the border, none of that died on that helicopter. Those conditions existed before Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born. They will exist after his organization finishes tearing itself apart and reassembles under a different name. Somewhere in Michoacán right now, a kid is standing in a field. The game hasn't changed. It just lost a player. If this one made you think, drop a comment. Subscribe for more. See you in the next one.